Fintech Chatter. Brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where I connect with fintech leaders for a bit of a chat. Today, I'm joined by Christian Westland Wigstrom of Monoova. And of course, I forgot to mention, I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. If you're coming back, thanks so much. And if you're new to the show, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast player. Christian, welcome back.
Thanks, Dexter. I feel like I was never really away, but now sitting here in front of you.
You weren't away, right? Because this is kind of like our annual podcast, which normally happens because we do the Finnies and we haven't done it this year. Yeah. And I think we did 3 in a row with you. And then last year, you finally bloody won and you weren't there at the awards. What's going on, mate?
I mean, winning Fintech Organization of the Year for Monoova was an amazing feeling. And one of the things I'm incredibly proud of. But I had the best possible reason for not being physically at the award ceremony, which was I was with my family back in Sweden for the first time since COVID.
Right.
So if ever the only reason that I could come up with that wouldn't give me overwhelming FOMO was probably that reason.
Yeah.
So happily I got to celebrate, and people back home in Sweden who had no idea that I was so cool found out that he's winning awards.
Yeah.
It was great.
I've got to be honest as well. I was a bit bored, right? Because I was asking you the same questions every damn year.
Why aren't you winning?
Yeah, it's no. It's part of the kind of People's Choice Awards where we ask the same questions. But my mind's cast back to when we did our very first podcast together, which was actually 3 years ago now. And the reason why I asked you onto the show was because you kind of had, and I think we first connected in around about 2019.
Yeah.
When you did a presentation on the future of payments and payments 2030, and it was just a really awesome kind of narrative around how our lives would be with instant payments technology in 2030. And I've invited you back on because a lot has happened in that last 3 years, and I want to kind of see if that is still on track, whether you've changed some of your thinking around that.
I mean, I feel like a lot has happened even since the beginning of today. So yes, a lot has happened in the last 3 or whatever years. So that presentation was sort of Monoova's coming out. It was in October 2019. It was obviously at our favorite event, the Fintech Australia's Intersect in Melbourne. We had just become Monoova by brand, logo, and all the rest of it, and realized that there are lots of larger players, more established, more technology already behind them than we had. So what did we have? Well, I thought we had a beginnings of a really cool product. We were already serving Wise at that time, or TransferWise. So that felt like we had a bit of chutzpah just from that. But maybe what we needed to do to stand out was to do something that wasn't just showing graphs, pointing up towards the right and talking about all the wonderful things we were. Rather, we're trying to tell a story of, first of all, like, why should someone care about a company like us? And second of all, how do we make what we do relatable? And obviously, those two things really belong together. Payments is, to my knowledge, one of the few things in life that everyone has experience of. I mean, there are probably a few other professions, a few other services and products you could say, well, everyone knows about that. Everyone has some kind of contact with food, I imagine. Everyone probably has some kind of contact with sewage and waste management. And then payments. It's sort of that. So while you can tell the most boring story in the world around API-driven payments automation, and you can be happy that that is where it ends, and you probably reach a great audience of technologists and others, you're missing out on the much greater narrative, which is how does it impact all of us, regardless of how, if and when we have any sense what goes behind the scenes. So I know that by the time I wake up, when I meet someone who isn't my wife or my 2 children, they will have transacted in all likelihood. They've bought a coffee, taken a bus, whatever it is. So the story in 2019 that I was telling was, well, how do the trends that we already started seeing then, and I'm sure we weren't the only ones who were looking to the future, but how were the trends going to change an everyday experience? So I followed a woman, I think her name was May at the time. I came up with what seemed to be a general future-oriented name with not too much sort of cultural baggage either way. And
being a stalker isn't a really good way of telling a narrative around payments.
and then, fair enough. And then I sort of followed her for part of her day, and I came up with this 2030. She was having dinner with a few friends, I think, and like what happened on the way to having that dinner. I must say, even though we're, since that story, almost 4 years further along, almost, we're almost past the half-year mark here, or halfway mark to 2030, I still think it holds.
Yeah.
The main thing, the main message, and my friends were joking about this for a long time. They thought it was trying to be semantically witty, but it was that while payments will not die, paying will die. So the title, I think, was something like The Death of Payments, something when I came out. It was the paying. It's the action, the activity of doing something with your hands that will disappear. So while we've come a long way from giving people pieces of metal that are, gold and silver, we're still doing something. We are tapping a phone. Yeah. That's probably the most sophisticated it gets. We're doing something. So we're still paying. The action is still there. But what I was arguing back in 2019 was that will no longer be the case. It will truly happen in the background. And then there were lots of different things. I remember talking a lot about Internet of Things that was sort of doing a lot of the paying for you. So the milk is talking to your calendar, so it knows that you're not going to be on holiday this week, therefore order some more milk. And there'd be lots of these things that sort of come together. What wasn't maybe quite as clear to me then, nor could I claim to have absolute clarity on it now, is, well, how exactly will that work? But what has happened over the last 3.5 or whatever it is years is that I think we're much closer to knowing what that answer looks like. And it sounds like I set this up back then, psychic or lots of other things, to then at some point talk about Pay2. And I'm not going to do a big plug around Pay2 here. We all know it's awesome and that Monoova is the leading provider. But Pay2 is this real-time direct debit, essentially in the Australian market only. Obviously, it will look different in the different jurisdictions. But when I provided the second chapter of this Death of Payment story. So chapter 1 was told in 2019. Chapter 2 was then told almost 2 years later because of COVID. 2020, there was no Intersect. So instead, the Intersect 2020 sort of ended up happening early in 2021. At that point, Pay2 had become a thing and people had a rough understanding what it could mean. And what I thought was exciting was to understand that a lot of the things that I'd spoken about May's day, when May was walking in and going to she was stepping out of I remember this works now. She was stepping out of a car. It was sort of the Uber experience. You don't have to pay for the Uber. You have to do the paying in Uber. Yeah. Payment is there. Paying isn't there. And then she goes into a supermarket and she just walks out. Think of like Amazon Go, which at that point was really cool and new. And then she goes from there to a restaurant. She doesn't have to wait for a waiter to come up with a merchant terminal. And then there are lots of kerfuffle because there isn't a receipt or the terminal's being used for someone else. And then she goes there to a fun fair. And then she goes home from the corner market, whatever it was. There's a lot of the idea there was that we should think of the Uber experience, but everywhere all the time. Yeah. And at the moment, you might well have an account that allows you to go to Amazon Go, but it's not your Uber account. So the thought here was that this essentially Uber account then keeps paying for you as you go in and out of various purchases. It's as if that one wallet just kept tracking you and tracing you. And at the same time, in parallel, you have your Internet of Things stuff at home that ensures that you have, you don't even need to go to a shop for a lot of these things, which again, is not super special. You can think of online shopping, but it's still doing something, and that I think will disappear. So in all, one tends to exaggerate the change in the short term and underestimate change in the longer term. That's a very well-known moniker. I think we got it roughly right. I don't think we're going to be too far off. We're not talking about flying cars by 2030. We're just talking about this activity that's been with us for 40,000 years is no longer going to be an activity. It's going to be something that happens in the background. Every once in a while, of course, you run into it, but you're going to go, oh, they're actually asking me to tap something. Just like we now, if someone asks you to swipe something, we just go, what's going on here? It's actually, it's a sign of something being wrong, as opposed to an everyday experience. I think we'll have the same experience with that.
So we've seen in that time as well some, kind of amazingly, crypto's still here. Bitcoin's got stronger, but they're now being seen, I think, less as payments mechanisms, certainly for high volume transactions. And we're now kind of moving more towards this kind of institutional, almost like tokenization, digital assets. What role do you see kind of, Monoova playing as, those spaces continue to evolve and the technology continues to evolve?
So we at Monoova have been working with the digital currency space for a long time. In fact, my first ever client, from memory, was a crypto exchange back in April 2017. So we have been at the margins, never ourselves dealing with the digital asset itself, but I guess been following this stuff. I think it's been clear for most people for some time that it is primarily a digital asset. It's an investment object rather than a means of payment.
Yeah.
I'd say hardliners would argue that that's just a function of the immaturity of it. And frankly, at some points we'll have sort of price discovery and so on. I'm not really sure I believe in that, but it doesn't mean something is wrong with it. It's just that the use case that might have thought of initially is not actually the strongest use case. But what at some point became really fashionable to say, if you were in the know, was to say, I don't really believe in Bitcoin, but I like blockchain.
Yeah.
For a long time, there was just this amorphous thing of Bitcoin equals blockchain equals probably some nefarious activity and you buy stuff on Silk Road or something. And then it moved from being nefarious to still being Bitcoin equals blockchain, blockchain equals Bitcoin. And that changed again. And then people were able to separate those two. I still think there is clearly, I don't have to be particularly clever to figure out that there is demand for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Clearly, there are lots and lots of people owning them to huge market cap values. But what we're seeing, as you're right, is this institutional exploration of how you can create actually means of payments. And that is happening both at a private level. So you have various private actors creating, stable coins left, right, and center. Some of them seem to be able to keep the peg against often the US dollar. Others have been spectacularly poor at keeping a peg. But the idea is that if you're creating a stable coin, then investment in them expecting appreciation is going to be the most boring activity in the world. It's like having a snail's race. If you're investing in a peg against that same peg, then ideally a return is zero.
Yeah.
But because there have been times when the peg doesn't hold, again, you start to feel a little bit nervous. And if you're not asking for any additional value from it, you're not asking for your money to be worth more by the time it gets to you from me, then you just want it to be safe. That's the whole point of what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
So having truly low counterparty risk, certainly after things like FTX and Terra, whatever they're called earlier, it seems to be quite attractive. And a lot of governments have caught on to this. And so Monoova's role here, in a very practical sense, that Monoova is one of, two handfuls of participants that were selected by the RBA to be part of the CBDC, so Central Bank Issued Digital Currency pilot, which we're very proud of, working with a client or two of ours to test a use case, which has to do with cross-border flows and ultimately our clients' customers having a direct claim on the RBA. Talk about removing counterparty risk. You're removing not just risk with us, you're removing the risk with our banking partner. And all of a sudden, it's you, private individual, calling the RBA and saying, can I have my money, please?
Yeah.
Now, that may or may not work at a wholesale, true rolling out, in a true rolling out phase. But for now, in a pilot, it's one of several, I think, really interesting use cases. And there are a few of them. I think there was an article today about Canvas having done completed at least the first transaction on their use case. And I think there are 14 in total. Well, sorry, I know that there are 14 in total. Most other parties are probably a bit larger. So we have ANZ, CBA, MasterCard, and the like. But some of them are also on the smaller side. And Monoova, we think it's really interesting to be there. Our role here is, I think, to be part of, creating not just a use case, but an understanding of why would anyone need this. So not just what can be done, but what should be done. If I was a policymaker, I would think of an EAUD or some CBDC as my wettest ever dream. I mean, imagine having programmable money and you're a fiscal policymaker and you need to stimulate the economy, expansionary fiscal policy. In the past, you were praying that the $500 you gave every family would be spent within some period. You hope that maybe they'll spend it within the first 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. Because if they don't spend it, then what's the stimulus?
Yeah.
Just handing out money, ends up in a mattress, and probably builds a bank balance sheet somewhere. Doesn't have to be bad, but it doesn't give you what you need. Imagine instead if you handed out 500 EAUD to everyone, and that was programmed to expire, a bit like a voucher, really.
Yeah.
After
and not work in pokie machines.
And not working poker machines. You can't spend it on alcohol or on bad music or whatever a patronizing government might decide to do. But it is a really powerful tool. And look, immediately you will have people shouting about anything from privacy to just practical things. Let's say you program it, it can't be used beyond 2 weeks and you can't buy alcohol. Okay, so you go and you buy nappies. Like what then? Does it mean that after the first transaction, you can spend it on anything you want for however long you want? Because otherwise, why would anyone accept that?
Yeah.
Otherwise, no one would accept an EAUD because they go, well, it's going to be worth this in 3 days, and I happen to be really thirsty. So there are lots of questions here, and you can't have these sort of sub-cluster currency islands where now you can use these AUDs here and these EAUDs. But it is a way of having very effective policy levers. So that could be exciting. That's from a government perspective, and I think we need to really factor in the government's preferences here because they're going to be the ones ultimately guaranteeing it and issuing these things. And I should say immediately, I'm not ruling out that there is a very strong case for private ones too. But right now, I think because of the uncertainty in broad crypto markets, everything is tainted with a brush that is probably a bit too broad, frankly. So right now, I think it's a good moment to focus on this other area to show just the power of the technology rather than thinking it's all FTX in the making.
Yeah.
But so for government, I think there is this positive way of doing more with a tool they already have. It's just way blunter right now than it could be. It doesn't change the concept of money. It's not a new thing. It's a new technology. Just like moving from, as I said, piles of metal to piece of paper to digits on a card doesn't change the concept of money. It just changes how you deliver it and how fast it gets delivered and all these other things. There might also be a defensive part of this, which is thinking again from a government perspective, which is I imagine an Australian policymaker, certainly at the Foreign Office or similar, would find themselves a bit annoyed if they travel to Fiji on some state visit and realized everyone is using an e-renminbi or some other currency that might be deemed to be at least less than friendly. That is not at all an unlikely situation. It is very possible that China or other parties will seek to at least unsettle the US dollar or possibly more locally an Australian dollar to be the obvious reserve currency in the jurisdictions that we're talking about. And so even if the government here or in some other country sort of didn't see the particular use for it, almost have to be forced to have something.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later, someone else will have it for you.
Yeah.
And you don't want to find yourself without options. So that's on that side. And then, as I said, for consumers, for us as private individuals, as much as for companies, of course, the fact that you could at least potentially have a direct claim on the RBA is incredibly efficient and incredibly safe. Bank runs would be a thing of the past. And we thought they were, but they were not.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that actually, because that's one thing that kind of we haven't factored in. Bank runs, used to take weeks, if not months. Now they take minutes.
Yeah.
Where do you see, what other risks do you see with instant payments and being able to move money in a fraction of a second, any amount of money in a fraction of a second? Do you see there are some other risks that perhaps we haven't thought of or considered deeply enough yet?
Of course, absolutely. I would imagine that any technology bears with it risks, and I would imagine we'd be idiots to think we have thought about them all. So the I guess categorical answer is yes. What could they be? I mean, if we use the example of bank runs, there was a famous bank run in London in 1780s or something, where the way they got around, the way they avoided being actually toppled by the people standing in line was by paying out everyone in farthings or pennies or whatever it would have been at the time, but like one after one.
Yeah.
They needed people to feel progress was being made, and if you stood in line, you would get your money.
Yeah.
So the way to do that was, rather than giving people, I don't know, £500, here's your very big piece of paper, go and colonize India, they gave them in individual little coins. So there was a sense, look, they're honoring their obligations. I'm just going to be steady. And people that stood in line for long enough felt, you know what, this is clear going on. I'll come back tomorrow morning. And they did that for long enough that they managed to get the support they needed from another bank. That's gone.
Yeah.
You can't say, I'm going to give you, look at your bank balance on you don't have to go to, an EAUD for this, right? If you say, CBA, could you please give me my $2,000? And they say, not an issue. Keep looking at your NetSuite, your NetBank app, and you see 1 cent after another dropping in. You're going to start thinking this is worrying in a way that you probably weren't quite before. So, of course, things that move fast tend to have different consequences than things that move slowly. At some level, we, speaking incredibly collectively, tend to love convenience. And we tend to love convenience over lots of things that sort of rationally we might think we value higher or highly, whether that is privacy or other things. When something goes wrong with privacy, then all of a sudden we're all, ums and yeah, and how dare you, and so on. But then if something doesn't really go wrong, then we keep putting our pictures on social media about stuff we probably shouldn't be telling others about. And I think the same thing goes with money. We're clearly very happy to work with credit cards and so on, even though everyone can see everything over cash, which is really the only way you can't really track as much because it's very convenient. If anything, an EAUD is going to be incredibly trackable, just as all blockchain currencies are. Yeah. You can really track it, but we quite like it. I'm curious, right? There seems to be this massive push at the minute around CBDCs and digital ID, particularly around kind of what I would call crypto natives. Yeah.
And you think, well, you're on Twitter the whole time telling everybody about your bags that you own and what you've sold. Where's privacy an issue for you? It's kind of, it is a bit of I do find it a bit of a strange one that we live in this world where basically everything is tracked.
Yes.
And yet somehow there's this big resistance around CBDC when credit card spending's tracked. We've been using digital payments for decades.
Of course. And an argument that's often levied in those cases, sort of against skeptics, is, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then what's the issue? Which is not a very strong argument. Just because you don't hide anything doesn't mean you want to share everything.
Yeah.
Even if my personal life is super happy, jolly, and everyone who knows me loves me, it doesn't mean that is something I need to share with everyone. You don't have to be half through divorce for it to be something that should be not shared. And the same thing goes for personal finances. You might be in great financial health. Doesn't mean you have to tell everyone that, nor would you have to tell them when you're not. But I do think we want to choose when something becomes public, and I'm not sure we always do. I personally know that I will see terms and conditions from Apple or Amazon or something and just go, yeah, whatever, which is not clever. I know it's not clever, and yet I do it. I don't think that cryptocurrency is primarily viewed as a privacy mechanism anymore, though. I think it was at one point, again, sort of Silk Road times, but it probably wasn't in the very, very early days. I mean, the way I understand it, and I am not a crypto native, and there are a trillion people I know who could do this more justice than I can, but I understood that the white paper by Satoshi was primarily a response to the 2008 financial crisis, where they didn't believe banks could take care of their money.
Which was kind of very similar to the Luna crisis and the FTX crisis. And,
that's right. But what's one interesting thing, I sort of felt that was truly in the past, that the Satoshi crowd had let this thing out in the wild, and people had picked it up and they'd done good and they'd done bad things with it. But no one was really an ideologue anymore. No one was really saying, I'm doing this because I don't believe in the banking system or the Fed. That felt pretty far removed from it. But then you see the banking crises over the last few months with a few failed American banks. And Bitcoin was really appreciating in that time. Now, I'm not in the know enough to say it was because Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, but the coincidence of timing was remarkable. You'd think it'd be a sort of flight to safety, and maybe that's what it was. Yeah, there was some crowd who thought, "Oh, Bitcoin is frankly safer than putting USD into an American bank that yesterday's we're talking about, conquering the world." Yeah, and I think that's kind of a really incredible narrative, right? And proof point of whether you believe in it or not. The reality is it hasn't gone to zero when many thought it would, and it keeps on doing what it does. That's right. And I think that's kind of that immutability, I guess, is something that people take a lot of comfort from. Absolutely. I think we should also remember that while things are moving very fast, and you started off saying lots has happened in the last 3 years, and I said, actually, frankly, since this morning, both of which are true, we're still talking pretty short time periods. Yeah. So if we give Bitcoin as a forerunner cryptocurrency, some kind of, date of birth in 2008 or so, I actually don't know exactly when it was, but let's say it's roughly then we're talking 15 years. Yeah. That's not a long time. If we look at the mutation of use cases that even in my brief lifetime in Australia, which is... It's probably about as long as DVD's got. Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah, that's right. It is younger than Facebook. Yeah. It's younger than a lot of things. And frankly, no one uses Facebook. Well, that's not true. I think we're probably seeing a generational shift there too. But it's younger than a lot of things that probably a number of people are seeing as an obvious part of their everyday. And this has not been around for long enough. I've been out of school for longer than this has existed. But it is, as we know, often difficult to extrapolate too far on too little time series data. There is this famous quote where the Chinese foreign minister, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name, I think it's like Zhao Enlai, so I did the attempt, was asked in 1972, what did he think about the consequences of the French Revolution? And he said, it's too early to tell. And obviously Western media thought that was hilarious. Yeah. Talking about long-term thinking, China, oldest country, and sort of civilization, a continuous sense in the world. Lots of comments on that. And then it's since been disproven that he was actually not talking about the 1789 revolution. He was talking about the 1968, as in the screaming in the streets of Paris just 3 years earlier. Yeah. And I think we might make a similar... I think the risk here is that we're commenting on things that have happened a bit too late, or too recently. And it would be, I think, an odd position to hold that sort of cryptocurrency is gone or spent. Yeah. I think there'll be, certainly what we've experienced at Monoova and what I've seen is that there's a proliferation of use cases. That to me speaks to the strength of a technology rather than a weakness. Yeah. It to me doesn't mean that whatever was there first is so bad that people do other things. It's more that people understood, wow, we can use this for lots of other things. Yeah. So I think we'll keep seeing that. What exactly wins in the end? Like, what's the standard? Are we going to be seeing only CBDCs really in the market and then a few rogue private stable coins? Or is the CBDC, in fact, a fad? It's just that it's happening right now, and therefore we attribute more value to it than we should. I don't know, but the technology seems to be doing rather well, and we're really early. So one of the other things that you talked about a lot was, I guess essentially, what I'd call e-commerce. That when you talked about the death of payments, we had Primer on the show a few weeks back. I know that you've partnered with them recently. What was the thinking behind that? Sorry. Good peg. Well done. Super happy to be partnering with Primer. So Primer is a UK-based, they'll probably tell me off for sort of classifying them incorrectly. I think of them as like a payments orchestration layer, from what I understand. I call them the Zapier of payments. All right, that makes sense. And they're very clear what they do and what they don't do, and they are truly a software service. Yeah. They're not actually managing money themselves, from what I understand. So it made immediate sense when we started looking at them to explore like what can we do together. So Monoova has obviously been now transacting on Pay2 for a few months, and we're excited to be sort of properly up and at scale with Pay2 in the Australian market. We're also coming out with a credit card gateway in the not too distant future. And for both of these, for us, really great new additions to our general product suite, Primer made sense. So what Primer allows you to do is, as an existing Primer customer, you're using them as your sort of checkout, sort of. And you can see, I want to use that credit card gateway and that credit card gateway. Or you might even I want to use Alipay and whatever it may be. They have lots and lots of different payment providers behind the scenes. And with us, all of a sudden you can, and I want to use Pay2.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to do a technical integration with us. You can get Pay2 through them. So you're already integrated. It's already in your e-commerce site, and you sort of toggle on. Now, there are a few asterisks around this, but from our client perspective, it becomes so much faster to be up and running. And it's not this big decision, should I be investing this many years? But it's truly, so many years is obviously an exaggeration. Should I be investing this many dev hours or dev days of doing Pay2? That won't suit everyone. Primer will have a certain target market that is more e-commerce focused maybe than some of our current target clients and target markets, who truly build their own ERP systems and ledgers and everything. And they probably want to have a deeper integration directly with us, and that's obviously fine. We're public with WagePay already in the market on Pay2, and we didn't need anyone in between us. But what's also going to be exciting for us is that we'll have our own credit card gateway on there. So you don't have to use Pay2 if you don't want to. If you feel that for your customers it's particularly important that they can pay you using cards, well, now you can through a very easy to use interface, sort of really very high quality product where we are literally sitting behind their facade, use Monoova to service you on cards, as well as, of course, Pay2, our auto matcher, sort of pay ID solution and account number solution, direct debits, whatever you want. Like you get it all in one place. And Primer is helping us with that, both to get the card product into market through our partnership and to broaden the market for our existing product suite. So very exciting. I think that's going to be fun. I personally believe that the future sits with Pay2 and real-time rails, both here and elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I also think that not all businesses can move to Pay2 tomorrow, if nothing else, because not all accounts are reachable. But even if we stretch it to be a year, 2 or 3 or 5, there'll be everything from institutional inertia to just very well-established patterns of behavior. It would make sense, in my mind, for a utility company to use Pay2. It seems like they get money directly. No need for direct debits and find out 3 days later whether money for that gas bill was there or wasn't there. You can do these things very quickly. But I think I'd be naive to think that these often very large companies could move between now and tomorrow. So the great thing with having a very broad product suite, including BPay, in fact, for us, and obviously our direct entry, even RTGS, NPP, etc., is that we can take you along. This becomes like a bridge. So at the beginning of your life with us, you might be using our BPay and direct debits and a little bit of Pay2 and NPP. And then over time, you realize that you can direct your customers to use the payment method that you think is best for them and for yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't have to change providers. You're on the same platform. You get to know as well.
But we were talking about Singapore before we hit record on the show.
Yeah.
Every time I go there, there's like 4 or 5 different terminals you kind of ask you to use depending on the card that you've got.
That's right. I don't think that's what it's going to keep looking like.
Yeah.
There are lots of things we used to have lots of, and that now looks incredibly arcane. If you were really important and you had a corner office, you probably had 6 phones on your big desk.
Yeah.
Now that would look like you are a few decades behind time. Decreasingly, will there be a need to have lots of different pieces of hardware for something that frankly can happen probably between your phone and someone else's phone? But I think the cost still matters, and the cost matters often for the merchant or the recipient of those payments, because they often do incur a cost of some kind.
Yeah.
Either by virtue of having to rent the merchant terminal in a more conventional setting, or I don't know, paying some subscription fee to access to some kind of payment service. Like, there could be lots of different costs involved. So for them, I'm sure it really matters. And if you're a small business and you're incurring either 10% sort of cost of acceptance fees or 5% cost of acceptance fees, you're going to go, well, be hard pressed to choose the 10%. So I think in that sense, it's definitely going to matter. And one great thing about Pay2 is, of course, that wonderful as cards are, unless you're sort of looking for that thing that only cards can do, and for credit cards, it's probably the credit, and there might be a few loyalty aspects and so on. As a means of payment, if the merchant can get not the guarantee of money today, but actual money today, and you can get it rather than paying percentage of value, you get it for cents, particularly for stuff that's not being more than $40, $50, you're going to be thinking that that's the way. I'd rather have money right now. So by the time my customer, leaves my shop, whether that's online or in person, by the time they leave, I have money that I can pay my bills with right now. And the guarantee of money from the card schemes is pretty solid. We can be pretty sure that the card schemes are going to give you money, but they will give it tomorrow. And that's just because that's how those systems are built up. There is a role to play there. But Pay2 is going to show up as a pretty cost-effective way of paying. And it's going to show its potential well and truly beyond the immediate sort of intuitive use case of real-time direct debit. That's how we come to think of it, I think, very quickly. And then we start thinking, well, what else? Well, again, there are some e-commerce settings where we're not, probably hard at this point to imagine using Pay2, possibly, to buy a pair of shoes online. Because what if they show up in 3 days' time or in 12 days' time and only one of them shows up? Or they're 2 left feet, or they're not the color I thought. We need to probably work on the liability component of it. So obviously, with chargebacks and cards, you have a way of getting your money back if it wasn't what you thought. That's not obvious exactly how that's going to work for Pay2 quite yet. But lots of other things are obvious. If you are buying immediate access to a service, why wouldn't you want the money to leave right now? Because it is anyway. It just doesn't show up right now with the merchant. Why wouldn't you just do it that way instead? And if the merchant is incentivizing you by saying, look, if you use cards, it's going to be this cost of acceptance surcharge on top of it. But if you use Pay2, it's for free. So I think we'll see that. And there was something else you were raising about, was at least cost rating. That's right. So cost will matter at all times. And as I said, even back then, it was part of trying to get some attention. We were a dwarf amongst giants, still are in many ways. I think we will see on the basic sort of hygiene factors of payment services, it'll be hard to maintain very high margins. But where it gets very attractive, both for us as a business selling the services and I think for our clients buying these services, is that because of the data richness, because of what is possible to see and control with these kinds of payments, you're not just coming to us because you know we can move money from point A to point B. You can go to a bank teller and ask them to run over to the next bank physically, and they can do that too. It's the way we do it. It's the, as we said, the controls in place. It's the data that comes with it. It's the fraud protection. It's the prevention from all kinds of things that might go wrong. So I think increasingly payments are going to be something that happens in the background, not just for the consumer, but even for the payment services company. That's going to be that, of course we move money, but actually the bigger things are all these other ways. We're not quite there yet because there's lots of value even in just moving to new payment types. Pay2 being obviously the biggest example right now. But I think that's exciting. Yeah,
it's fascinating though, right? That the kind of pace of innovation in this space is always pegged back or kind of drawn back because of the risk element.
Yep. And that makes sense.
Yep.
And there are risks, but so often the thing that brings about the risk might
the risks are there's gazillions of them, right? I mean, you've got regulatory and compliance risk, but then there's all the stuff that you've talked about, right? Which It's like,
technology failures, like there are
technology failures,
cyber
branding issues,
crimes,
and kind of all sorts of stuff.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think one would be stupid to dismiss that and think, well, it doesn't apply to us. You can be very well-resourced business in Australia and have all kinds of issues with cybercrime, as we know, as of late. And so why would we think that a small company would somehow be immune from it? No one is. Doesn't matter how big or small you are. But I also think that often the kind of technology that brings about a new array of risks often, not always, has a kernel to the solution or the mitigants to those risks. And even if that technology doesn't, maybe another one does. Another favorite happens to be another Chinese thing. But when China started putting in telephony in the 70s, there was a real concern that maybe the world would run out of copper because all the wiring would be done out of copper. And then we got fiber instead, and it is no longer an issue. And so what is a concern at one point might turn out to be quite a small one at a later stage. Doesn't mean it's foolproof. Maybe there is no fiber optics to help us with these issues or equivalent, but probably something.
It feels very much, and from what I see, that the technology is already in place, and a lot of the predictions that you made are actually already happening today in that kind of 2030, kind of the day in the life of May that you presented. A good example would be going into a restaurant, tapping your phone, getting the QR code, ordering from the menu, getting the food delivered, it's paid for, you walk out. But then it kind of feels that also there are these huge issues that need to be resolved first before we can take that kind of next step, particularly around digital ID. We've had some massive data breaches, which would probably, I don't know myself included, I don't know anybody who hasn't been a victim of.
Yeah, I was victim twice.
It's crazy, me too, right? I mean, that is just, it's insane, really. But you look at that and you think, we've still got, a long way to go before it can be ubiquitous and seamless. What do you see as the big thing that needs to be tackled before that whole 2030 vision becomes a reality?
I pause because I don't think there's like one thing.
Right answer.
There are lots of different things. It is a matter of habits. It's one thing. We should also state there's nothing sort of teleological about invisible payments. There's nothing that says that's the only way the world could go. But if you look at the last few thousand years or whatever it is of payments innovation, it tends to go towards more convenient.
Yeah.
And what's the most convenient thing in the world? I don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
That's the most convenient. You were saying already now we can tap a phone at a table instead of asking for a waiter. Shame, really, because sometimes the conversation with a waiter can be fun, but equally, it's very convenient. But you're still tapping.
Yeah.
Imagine not tapping.
Oh, look, my kind of Amazon Prime account is just, it's a godsend, right? It's,
But I think, so some things are going to be driven by, most things, ultimately, I think, are driven by consumer behavior and expectations. But as responsible societies, you want to make sure that before you let loose a very fast car, you make sure they have really good brakes. The ability to drive fast is as much a function of having great brakes as it is about having a strong engine. Yeah. And so that will apply here too. In our world, brakes probably equates to regulation, probably equates to having the right kind of licensing regimes. And obviously in Australia, a lot of those things are changing, which I think is great. But we're not that far away from this, as you said. Maybe the thing that's the most sort of Jetsons-like, to use a very old reference, most similar to sort of predicting flying cars in 2030, it's probably all the Internet of Things stuff.
Yeah.
The fridge buying your milk. But that too doesn't feel too far off. Yeah. The question is just how much do you think that sort of simplifies your life? This might still fall over the next 6 years.
Yeah, look, I kind of, and this isn't a, kind of dwell on, some, really unfortunate kind of outcomes for businesses, but, the kind of milk run, the kind of convenience delivery stuff. My first job when I was a 14-year-old was working on a milk run.
Yep.
And I lost my job because it went bust, right?
Yep.
You couldn't make that work by hiring 14-year-old kids and paying them peanuts. And I don't see where that's actually changed. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is just that the unit economics don't stack up.
Yep.
But also, I don't know about you, but I actually like to go and do grocery shopping.
Totally. I mean, the perfect pilot for let things come to you rather than you go to them was, I don't know, COVID isolation.
Yeah.
You couldn't go anywhere. So all of a sudden everything had to come to you. And people, I'm sure, found it really relaxing in the first few weeks and months. At some point, they couldn't wait to get outside, actually move, actually be more than 2.5 person within 5 kilometer radius or whatever the rules were. So there are lots of things that can surprise us. But ultimately, I think it comes down to how we want to spend our time. So the competition for everyone at all points is not necessarily another company or another person doing what you're doing and possibly doing it better. Competition is what else you can spend your time on.
Yeah.
So competition could be in the form of, like, if we think of Monoova marketing, there are some really formidable businesses out there that are doing things that impress me as much as they annoy me, but they're not necessarily what I'm competing with if I have a Monoova post or ad somewhere. I'm also competing against a cute kitten you can spend the next 5 seconds on YouTube. So I'm sort of competing with everything, not just people who do, and they are competing with that kitten too.
Yeah.
And so here again, the question becomes one of, well, if we take paying out of your everyday life, you have somehow, somewhere, gained time. We're not telling anyone what to do with that time. Obviously, we can't. Yeah. Most people are probably going to be watching that kitten with that additional time. But at least it becomes a choice. And we're sort of approaching the limits of optimization once we start giving people a few seconds here and there. But I do remember, to sort of tie back to the 2019 talk of mine, I was trying to put it in some kind of order of magnitude that might pique someone's interest. I'm going to try to get the maths right here. But I said that there were roughly 2 billion cups of coffee being sold every day in the world, which was true then, 2019. It's what it is now. And I just postulated that it takes 15 seconds to drink, to pay for a coffee. That's what it was. It was 2 billion cups of coffee, and let's assume that it takes 15 seconds, I don't know, fiddling with your wallet, tapping or coins or wherever you are in the world, 15 seconds to pay for it. So that's 15 times 2 billion, that's 30 billion seconds. And by total coincidence, there are about 30 million seconds in a year. So that means as a humanity, we're spending 1,000 years per day paying for coffees. That's just one of several things we pay for. So by removing that one purchase time of 15 seconds, I know lots of ifs here, but if we remove just that, then in of itself, that has given humanity 1,000 years back per day. With that, we could cure cancer, or we could watch kittens. Yeah. But at least we're not fiddling with wallets. Yeah. And if it's a matter of sort of optimization, it doesn't have to mean that people become isolated. It doesn't mean that we go back to sitting in our bedrooms. It just means that while you're standing somewhere or talking to someone, you don't have to say, sorry, I'm going to put you down for 2 seconds, or just bear with me, I'm now at the till paying. You keep having the conversation. Maybe, just maybe, you become slightly better friends. Maybe, just maybe, you make an observation that will change something for someone. Because it's really banal, the paying. Yeah. It's important, but it's not super exciting. Yeah. And I tell you what, if you could save me time that I spend at these self-serve checkouts at Coles and Woolies, man, I think that's got to be the greatest frustration of my life. Standing there waiting for somebody that's flashing and saying, yeah, didn't, there's a problem with it. You could, I think I must spend about 40% more time at those things than just having somebody at checkout and going through and paying for it. Well, look, maybe it's more than 1,000 years a day. Yeah. Well, Christian, it's been awesome to catch up with you. Really fascinating chat. Really good to
talk through just what this last 4 years has brought up, right? And it's, I think pretty much everything that you spoke about is, it's on that path. I don't see anything, that you think, that was crazy, that was wrong, that's not going to happen.
It definitely feels decreasingly crazy.
Yeah.
I'd say. Still 6 years to go.
We get loads of cool people listening to this show. A lot of them very top talent. If they're interested potentially in a career at Monoova, what's the best way for them to find out?
Well, there is obviously Monoova.com, and then there's LinkedIn, and then there are probably 1,000 other ways that they can get hold of me, because my personal data was stolen twice this year.
Yeah, there you go. So if you're on the black market for jobs, you should have Christian's details.
Check Optus.
Yeah. And obviously we get lots of founders, people within the industry listening to this, could be potential partners, customers.
Absolutely.
What's the best way to reach out?
Same things, but also we are often talking to people in our industry. We don't want to be confined, obviously, to just fintech peers, but we do love fintech peers, and we speak a lot to them. So chances are I might have spoken to a few of them before, so they will know already how to get hold of me, and everyone else has said LinkedIn is probably the fastest.
Yeah. Well, listen, to in 44 countries, so you never know, it might be somebody new to the market. Well, it's been fantastic to catch up. Thanks for listening, folks. As always, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you're coming back, thanks for your support. If you're new to the show, make sure to give us a like and subscribe. Follow us on your favorite podcast player. And if you have the time, please leave us a review. It really helps me in getting great guests like Christian onto the show. Until the next episode, keep well. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you find world-class fintech leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.